No creator, no Brahma can be found. No matter this wheel of life, we just bear phenomena roll, dependent on conditions all. From the Visuddhimagga. Because of A arises B, because of B arises C. There is no A, there is no B. There is no B, there is no C. In other words, this being so, that is. This not being so, that is not. From Venerable Narada's book, The Buddha and His Teachings. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Ryan. My Dharma name is Xianyao, which means to manifest illumination. And I hope today that I can live up to that name and manifest just a little illumination. I'm thankful that conditions are favorable for us all to be here today. Everything that has ever happened from beginningless time till right now had to happen for each and every one of us to be here, and I think that that's pretty special. I'm thankful that conditions are also favorable for me to be here and for my personality to do what it loves to do, and that's discuss the Buddha Dharma. It looks like, are there some new people here today? Anybody? So, welcome. I want this talk and every talk to be accessible to not only the advanced practitioner who's been practicing for years and years and lifetimes, to be a benefit and accessible to them, also to those people who have practiced for a little while, a few years, but also accessible and beneficial to those who this is perhaps their first time ever hearing a Dharma talk. If you have any questions, there'll probably be some ideas, some philosophies that are new to you. See me after, or anybody that you see wearing a robe. The topic for today's talk is happiness and well-being. More specifically, the topic for my talk today is how to manifest well-being through the Buddhist teaching of the four nutriments. The basis for this particular teaching is to pay attention to what we feed our body and mind, as this then flows into consciousness and creates our reality. And the nutriment that we're feeding our body and mind and intentions, which then flow into consciousness, can either help to manifest well-being, or if we're operating while wearing the blinders of greed, anger, and delusion, it can and will manifest frustration, discontent, unsatisfactoriness, suffering. As I timed my talk, I realized that it was going long, so I won't have enough time this morning to go as deeply into the topic of nutriment as I would like. So hopefully in the future I can expand on this talk and perhaps give us a talk specific to each of the four nutriments. But the goal for today's talk is to show and explain briefly the difference between mundane happiness and the well-being generated through Buddhist practice. Of course, I want to introduce the four kinds of nutriment and show how a person can generate through this practice lasting well-being that is independent of external causes and conditions for oneself and for others. The primary sources for my talk today includes Venerable Narada's The Buddha and His Teaching, which is where the first bits that I read from, or that I mentioned, came from. This is a book that I use frequently for sources for talks, and it's available downstairs in the donation section. You can donate whatever you like and have it. It's a very concise book, very logical, very to the point, very philosophical, one of my favorites. Also this, Dr. Richard O'Connor's Happy at Last. This is the audiobook, which is a mainstream look at nutriment and begins to show the difference between mundane happiness and lasting well-being. And he talks a lot about Buddhism in the book. And then Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh's Heart of the Buddhist Teaching, which this is the book that the new teachers this year are basing our talks on. here's my copy, that Stacy Engage's dog ate the front but was kind enough to lead me to teaching, so thank you. And I have used this book and read this book many, many times, and for every talk I've ever given, I've used it as a primary source, and then also as a primary source for life in general. It's a very good book. I highly recommend it. And it was from this book that I first was introduced to the idea, the teaching of nutriment. And over time, that idea of the teaching of nutriment has gone from, and to then build a practice around it. It's very concise, and you can build your entire practice around this idea. And it went from a small seed, to use Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh's terminology, to now maybe a small to medium-sized Bodhi tree. It grows. And the point of this practice, and what I want to say today, I want to make sure you're aware, is that you're not looking for perfection from the very beginning. It's a gradual process, and that's what I like about this teaching. Before we get into happiness and well-being, I want to backtrack a little to what I first mentioned from Venerable Narada's book, the Buddha and His Teachings. Some background information that we need to be aware of in order that we can manifest this lasting well-being. Life is a series of causes and conditions. To follow what Venerable Narada said, because of this, that happens. And it seems very simple, and it probably is a slight oversimplification, because there's not just one cause and one effect. There's not one cause that brought us all here today for the effect of us being here. There's an interconnected web of numerous causes with numerous results, but the ultimate culmination is this moment. And this moment comes to be because of everything that has ever happened, from beginningless time to right now. It's influenced also not only by all actions and words, but this moment is also influenced by thoughts, ideas, and intentions about the future. It is as it is due to the truth of causality. This moment is the way that it is because one thing leads to another, to another, to another, to another. And because of this, it makes no sense to struggle against this current moment. Because this current moment is caused, it just is as it is. To try to struggle against this moment creates more mental suffering. So if the moment is uncomfortable, that's one thing. Moments are uncomfortable. But then to try to struggle against that, push things away, pull things to us to try to change the moment, that's creating mental suffering. And likewise, to ignore this moment, to try to mask it and block it, creates problems, multiple problems for ourselves and for others. So if we look at our lives in this moment and see that we're not where we want to be, we're less happy than we want to be, we're more stressed, angry, sad, jealous, lonely than we want to be, if we keep repeating harmful patterns of actions, thoughts, and words, in this moment, because we are caused and everything that's going on right now is caused, we should not be too hard on ourselves. We should be aware of what's going on, but not angry at ourselves. This moment is caused. All arising thoughts, emotions, actions, and words are caused by our habit energy and everyone else's habit energy. We ourselves are a result of everything that has ever happened in the universe. So where's the freedom? If everything is caused, where's the freedom? The freedom appears to me to reside in our ability to change. So if we understand causality and we know that this moment is made up of everything that's ever happened and all thoughts about the future and intentions, we say, how did we get to where we're at? And we pay close attention to that. And if we remain on this trajectory, where will we end up? And if we don't like where we're headed, what we have to do then is set up a plan to create the future that we want. We need to give our future selves a break. So we need to take action now to change the future by making proper choices today. And the practice and study of nutriment is a map to help us do that. The study of nutriment is the formulated, gradual training of the Buddha Dharma. Very concise and to the point. Well, let's look now at the goal of this teaching and every Dharma talk you'll ever hear. I would say it's to manifest happiness and well-being for ourselves and others, now and in the future. And we'll look now at the difference between mundane worldly happiness and the continual stress-free well-being that is generated through Buddhist practice. From Dr. Richard O'Connor's Happy at Last, everyone wants to be happy, but we don't know how to actually create happiness. We think it should just magically happen. And he goes on to say that happiness is not our natural resting state. And I myself have seen that, and I'm sure most of you have as well. Why is that? Why is not happiness our natural state? Well, it appears, several factors, but it does appear to be caused by a misunderstanding of what makes us happy, so a misunderstanding of mundane happiness and well-being. Well-being, continual well-being, takes work. So to help us understand the right effort necessary to generate this lasting well-being, I would like to now introduce briefly the Four Noble Truths. And in mentioning the Four Noble Truths, this is the Buddha's first teaching on the cause of suffering and the way out of suffering. The first of the Four Noble Truths is that life is unsatisfactory, it's stressful, it's incomplete, there's something missing, there's something lacking, things are temporary, often rendered as life is suffering. This suffering is caused by desire. It's a desire for this moment to be other than what it is, or a desire to cling to this moment and make it maintain and last forever. So if we don't like this moment, one thing that we do is, if we have a sort of a greedy personality, is to bring things to it to try to change this moment and make it the way we like. Or if we have an aversive personality, we try to remove things from this moment to get it the way we like. But these are both based in delusion. So we push away or we cling to the moment. And we'll return to the second noble truth momentarily. The third noble truth is that there is a way out, and the fourth noble truth is the way out, and that's the Buddha Dharma, specifically the Eightfold Path. And within this Eightfold Path, which is not the topic today, you will find all of the Buddha's teachings, including the four nutriments, which are located within the second noble truth. So now back to that second noble truth, the truth of the cause of suffering. Often we look for refuge in things that are temporary and do not offer lasting support. We strive for money, possessions, status, and self-comfort. We try to push away suffering through any number of drugs, including shopping, eating, drinking, high-risk behavior, frivolous entertainment. We fail to accept the futility in this. Somehow we think that the next big thing will bring us that lasting happiness that we're looking for, will bring us peace and joy somehow, magically. Our normal background state is one of mild to moderate anxiety, and I myself have seen that, and I would imagine if you're here today, you've seen that as well. Often this anxiety appears to arise seemingly from a void, and then our minds reach out and create a cause, and we grasp onto that cause. And so then this cycle is created. Anxiety arises, we search for a cause. And suffering goes on and on and on in this way. This may sound unsettling, but I think that you'll see it to be true that this anxiety is our normal state, our normal background state. And it makes sense. It makes sense evolutionarily. And this information came from Dr. Richard O'Connor's book, Happy at Last. The basis for this. Evolution has made us on edge, worried, stressed, competitive, jealous, never satisfied. And these traits were bred into us. Scientifically, it makes sense that our underlying state is one of mild anxiety. Our ancestors who were calm and relaxed were more likely to be eaten. And they weren't able to then pass on those genes of calm and tranquility. so those genes weren't passed on, but they still reside. We just have to locate them and cut through the anxiety. And the good news of Buddhism is that we can change the underlying suffering and dissatisfaction in our lives to an underlying state of well-being and calm. And how can we do this? That's the point of this talk today. This can be accomplished by the way we live our lives, by our goals and aspirations, by our morals and values, by our use of time, and by changing the way that we view the world. The Buddhist practice and study of nutriment is a method to help us along this endeavor to manifest well-being. This practice is a way of living. It is a method for being aware of what we feed our bodies and mind. If we look at our lives and see only fleeting happiness dependent on external causes and conditions, the wise endeavor would be to seek out and implement a different method for manifesting well-being. In regards to suffering and happiness, it's said in the Discourse on Right View, when something has come to be, we have to acknowledge its presence and look deeply into its nature. When we look deeply, we will discover the kinds of nutriments that have helped it come to be and that continue to feed it. It then goes on to elaborate 4 kinds of nutriment that lead either to our happiness or our continued suffering. Those 4 are edible foods, sense impressions, intention or will, and consciousness. The first aspect of nutriment is edible foods, and this is the food that we feed our body, what we eat. And what we eat can bring about mental or physical suffering, or it can help facilitate awakening. We must educate ourselves. Buddhism is not so much a belief system as it is an educational system, and that's why it makes sense to me. We have to learn to distinguish in regards to the foods that we eat between what is healthy and what is unhealthy. We have to learn to distinguish between what is ethical and what is unethical in regards to the food we eat, specifically the food production and transportation of that food, distribution. If animals suffer or are killed for our food, it likely isn't ethical. If other humans suffer through low wages, unhealthy work environments, unsafe work environments, the food that we're eating likely isn't ethical. If the food production requires large amounts of fossil fuels for delivery and production, it likely isn't ethical. If the food causes ourselves, our children, our friends, and family to be less healthy, it likely isn't ethical. And there's a great book on this, which I didn't include as a source, because I didn't use it as a source, but it's called The Ethics of What We Eat, Why Our Food Choices Matter by Peter Singer and Jim Mason. And that's a great book which I recommend to anybody interested in this topic. In the words of Thich Nhat Hanh, we are sowing the seeds of suffering when we are smoking, drinking, eating unhealthy foods, eating in excess, eating unmindfully, or eating animal products. We pass those seeds on to others. For example, if our children see us eating this way and engaging in less than ethical behaviors, be it food or otherwise, we pass that on to our kids or to others, people, friends, and family. If they see us doing this, they say, oh, well, this guy's a Buddhist and he's eating whatever he wants, no problem, I'll eat whatever I want. And then we pass these troublesome seeds on to these other people as emotions, memory, and habit energy. So it's not just ourselves we're affecting the entire world. And we must change now. We must be brave enough to face this suffering now. To do otherwise is to put off the right effort on future generations. And unfortunately, if things don't change in regards to food production and the environment, humanity may be running out of future generations. So we must become aware of how we grow and transport our food, treat all sentient beings, treat the environment, and treat other people. These simply are things that cannot be put off for another generation. Now is the time to act on these items. The second aspect of nutriment is sense impressions. The senses would be the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Nutriment for the senses would be the sense objects that come into contact with the six senses. So for eyes, it's what we see, ears, it's what we hear, nose, it's what we smell, tongue, what we taste, body, what we touch, and mind, what we perpetually think about. Many toxins flow into our senses when we live in a scattered, unmindful way. Examples would include billboards. When we're driving down the road, they just flood our senses. We read them, they come in. Commercials on TV and radio, they're loud, obnoxious, they get stuck in your head, they get you to buy things that you probably don't need. And if we're unmindful, they just flow right in, go through our ears and our eyes, and they generate emotions within us. Also movies and TV, network news, social media, all images, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and ideas. That is the food for our senses. When we are mindful, we are aware of what's entering our senses. So we're aware of the contact between whatever sense it is and the external object. We know when we are contacting something that is less than wholesome in regards to sense objects. These less than wholesome sense objects then facilitate the arising of the three poisons, so it's wise to be aware. These three poisons are greed, anger or aversion, and delusion. And these three are the root cause of the continuous cycle of suffering. When we pay attention, what we need to do is pay careful attention to every moment. Mindfulness can be viewed as a remembering, a deep remembering to pay attention to what's going on right now. When we pay careful attention, we start to be aware of those things which are seeds for unrest, discontent, worry, doubt, sadness, perpetual suffering. We can then start to remove these things from our lives, because if they're causing us trouble, logically it makes no sense to keep feeding them into our senses. And this begins the process of renunciation. Through this, we can begin to remove, like I said, it's a gradual process. We have the intention, which is next, but we have the intention to change. And we begin to remove tabloids or mindless pop magazines, mindless TV. By the age of 60, the average American will have spent 15 continuous years of their life staring at a TV screen. And that's disgusting. That's a lot of time spent just staring at the TV. Social media, we can start cutting back on that a little. Network news, which is just nothing but perpetuating suffering. Not to say that we shouldn't be informed, but we need to be aware and mindful of what's coming in. Commercial-filled radio, commercial-filled TV. We can instead start to choose things like when we're driving, listening to books on tape, listening to Dharma talks, listening to chanting, or writing in silence. Instead of reading these frivolous things, we can read science, we can read history, psychology, Dharma books, self-help books. There's a lot of books that help ourselves and others. We can speak kindly and with a purpose. We can cut down or cut out mindless TV. And again, I'm saying we have these intentions. If your entire life you've done all of these things, to say, I'm going to change tomorrow, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's a process. But maybe you can. Give it a whirl. We just need to remember to water the wholesome seeds. That's the point. In the words of Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, we use our Buddha eyes to look at the nutriments we're about to ingest, whether it's into our body, our senses, or our intentions. And this is mindfulness of nutriment. As the Buddha said, when friends and noble disciple understands nutriment, the origin of nutriment, the cessation of nutriment, and the way leading to the cessation of nutriment, in that way he or she is one of right view. The third aspect of this practice of nutriment is volition, intention, or will. And this is what we feed our mind by way of intention. It's the desire to obtain what we want with the aim of happiness. Volition or intention is the foundation of our actions, thoughts, and words. It's the ground on which we stand. And like we've mentioned several times here, people strive for happiness. This is their ultimate intention. However, very often the things people strive for are in actuality the obstructions to their happiness. People strive for things that only bring continual frustration. And this is due in large part to a fundamental misunderstanding of reality, from the unknowing ignorance which propels and feeds the rounds of unsatisfactory existence, and continues to water the habitual pattern of greed, anger, and delusion. Like I mentioned, the things that we try to accumulate are generally obstacles to our happiness rather than causes for ongoing well-being. And when others see us striving for mundane goals and rewards, these seeds, again, can be passed on to them as emotions, memories, sensations, etc. These unwholesome seeds then become food for our consciousness. And when we pass them on, they become food for other people's consciousness. And they perpetuate themselves over and over due to the habit energy. We must cultivate, through education and practice, morality, concentration, and wisdom, so that we can cut through old habitual patterns and see that the food of increased rank, status, wealth, fame, competition, revenge, possessions, accumulation of possessions, these are generally obstacles to rather than causes of continual happiness. As Thich Nhat Hanh says, we must look closely at our intentions and see if it is pushing us toward liberation, peace, and happiness, or toward anxiety, discontent, and continual suffering. The fourth and final aspect of the practice and study of nutriment is consciousness. And as described by Thich Nhat Hanh in the book The Heart of the Buddhist Teaching, he describes this as store consciousness. And this store consciousness is composed of all the seeds of our past actions, thoughts, and words. It has both an individual aspect and a collective aspect. It contains seeds from ourselves, our family, our friends, from society, and from our ancestors. These seeds continue to be passed on. That's why I said before, we need to act now rather than put it off on our future selves or others in the future. And this store consciousness can be viewed as the storehouse of karma. All edible food and the food of the senses and our intentions flow into consciousness. So this would be the food of consciousness. And they become food for the consciousness in the form of seeds waiting to be nurtured and as habitual patterns. Our habit energy is our normal way of behaving, of acting, speaking, and thinking. It's our karmic line of being. When conditions become favorable for seeds within our store consciousness to ripen, they then manifest as body, mind, and environment. So the very food that we're ingesting into our body, senses, and intentions create and maintain our existence through the ways that we interact with and respond to external objects and internal objects due to habit energy. And this illustrates samsara, the continued cycle of discontent and suffering. Each thing is flowing into the next. So body, what we feed our body, what we feed our senses, and our intentions flow into consciousness, are stored there. When conditions become favorable, they then manifest into the world, we interact with the world, and they flow back into consciousness, and it's a loop. Clearly, consciousness is composed of and fed by the other three nutriment factors. And the interconnectivity of the four nutriments is clear. So what should we do? We should nourish our bodies and therefore our consciousness by eating healthy foods, by eating ethically, and by eating mindfully. We should guard our senses and be aware of what is flowing into our eyes, ears, nose, mouth, body, and mind. Be aware of the contact of our senses to the external world. And we should set noble intentions. Instead of selfish intentions, we should set noble intentions, such as being of benefit to ourselves and to others. In conclusion, the study and practice of the four nutriments, though it's in every aspect of the Buddhist teaching, that as a systematic method is fairly untapped as a resource for deep practice. And it's a primary practice for myself. This practice will take a person from beginning to the end of the path of awakening. The method is clearly marked, and there's no secret Gnostic teaching. It's available to anyone. The four nutriments as a Buddhist practice can and should be tested for validity. I don't study and practice the Buddha Dharma because the Buddha said to, or because anybody said to. I practice the Buddha Dharma because it makes sense. So, may we all set noble intentions, such as, may we be a benefit to ourselves and to others. Thank you.